Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a continued passion for public television, we are proud to underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES television.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Flames and wind were in the news this week as wildfires raged and dark smoke from a petroleum refinery clogged the air. At the same time that many of us experienced memory surges of Hurricanes Katrina and Ida. We'll look at these stories, plus the health of Congressman Steve Scalise, the latest on the airport upgrades, political potshots and campaign advertising, and we'll take a special look at the efforts to provide for musicians affected by Katrina. On our stage are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Greg LaRose, editor of the Louisiana Illuminator, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and LeBron Joseph, anchor and reporter, WGNO-TV Channel 26. Over to Greg first, because we had wildfires, not that we don't have them at times in Louisiana, but this has sort of been a very special event of wildfires that we've had.
Yeah, and I was surprised to learn, just sort of diving into research about how much do we see on an annual basis. There are a few hundred acres that we lose each year to this. That's the norm. Just in August alone, we're approaching like somewhere close to 600 fires. And all told, we'll probably reach about 60,000 acres lost, which historically isn't that big. When you think about going back to 1924, there were fires that destroyed 5 million acres. So while these aren't particularly large, they haven't taken down a whole lot of structures. If your house is one of them that's lost, obviously it's devastating. Right. And officials are really stressing how this might be the new norm.
And of course, 2 lives have been lost.
True.
Due to one in Washington Parish and also in St. Tammany Parish.
Right, debris fires where officials have said they feel these folks may have been burning debris in their own yards and it gets out of control.
The governor was pretty outspoken. What he said, like, anybody alive in Louisiana has never experienced anything like this before.
Biggest since 1942 when 1.5 million acres were lost. And yeah, no one really, probably recalls much of that because we were in the middle of World War II. So yeah, this is, for our lifetimes, I think, pretty significant.
And it's primarily in the western part of the state?
Yeah, that's where it seems to be most intense, although the breakouts, as you pointed out, have been in Washington, St. Tammany, Tangipahoa. St. Landry had fires Wednesday night that, required emergency response. The biggest is the Tiger Island fire that's consumed about 30,000 acres of forest in Beauregard Parish near Maryville and DeRidder.
Yeah, and I've read some stories of people, fleeing those flames, just getting out. So how are we prepared to fight these fires? Like, for the most part, like you said, in 1942 and then back to 1924, almost 100 years, since we've really had big problems with this. How prepared are we to take care of it?
The Department of Agriculture is basically our line of first defense. Actually, let me take that back. Local fire department, so that first line of defense, many of them are volunteer efforts. So, this is like, and the governor has credited them for keeping things as under control as they have. But essentially the state agency, if you will, that oversees firefighting is the Department of Agriculture and Forestry. They have 152 firefighters. Commissioner Mike Strain says we need to move that number way up. He also wants the state to purchase some of the tanker planes that dump the water on the fire. Right now, they have those planes and helicopters on loan from National Guard units.
We don't have our own. The department doesn't have our own. So basically, Strains is going to be asking for more money from the legislature. I mean, have they listened to him in the past for his needs?
They've tended to sort of restrain his budget in that regard. And really, if you go back to the Jindal administration, he's had to learn basically to be more efficient. They do have spotter aircraft that they use for fires, weevil damage, damage, just things they need to get up in the air and see from above. But in terms of firefighting equipment, no, they have very little and none insofar as aircraft.
I think the burn bans are pretty interesting because they've had to reinforce it this week to remind people not only to not barbecue, no charcoal, no propane, but even don't do this at a tailgate. As football crazy as we are for our Saints in the LSU and Tulane season that starts this weekend.
And UL Lafayette has essentially prohibited using open fires, barbecues, grills, and such at their game with Northwestern State.
That completely changes the lifestyle.
Yes.
I mean, completely.
Right.
It
For
really
tailgate,
does.
yeah.
For tailgate.
And it's the beginning of dove hunting season this
pasta
weekend,
salad tailgate.
which everyone typically associates a big outing outdoors with doves. So the governor was saying, it's not part of the burn ban, but they're strongly discouraging people.
And the outdoor barbecue pits aren't really part of the burn ban either, but the governor is saying, please, just don't do it right now. I mean,
why
we're too
risk
dry.
it? He says, that's they will start fires on occasion, so just be on the safe side if you're not, keep them in the shed, I guess.
This would be a good business for microwaves, huh?
You would think, and cold cuts.
But I mean, Agriculture Commissioner Strain has said, he's really sort of put it in perspective, saying Louisiana right now is kind of like a tinderbox because a lot of the down trees from the hurricanes are still there and dry. And
Yeah, I asked him about that yesterday in regards to, is there any way we can mitigate that risk? And after the hurricanes, the federal government offered timber farmers $500 to $600 an acre to clear the forest floors and replant. The problem was that was a reimbursement. So the farmers had to come up with that money up front, and he says, not really a whole lot of them were able or willing to do that.
something we should rethink probably also, so that we don't have this kind of situation in the future, because who knows, this drought in the high temperatures have been record-breaking, but are we going to go through this again? We might.
That seems to be the
prepared.
mindset of the
Yeah.
Ag Commissioner, the Governor, and others that are just, watching how our climate adapts.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, over to you, LeBron. And we mentioned hurricanes, and of course. This week was the 18th anniversary of the real big one, Hurricane Katrina.
Yes.
Hard to imagine, 18 years ago. After it, there were some special efforts to try to help the
Yes.
musicians in our community.
There were, and those efforts were successful, and a lot of really wonderful things, folks from around the country propping up and helping our musicians. One being the Musicians Village, Harry Connick Jr., Branford Marcellus coming together, along with Habitat, building those homes for musicians, as well as the Ellis Marcellus Center, which was built to educate kids in those communities. That is still going strong, a performance center. This is in the Upper Ninth Ward on the grounds of where was the old Cone High School. And it's a full community. All of those homes are full of those families. Go back a little bit to the beginning, though. The business in and of itself is different. Some good, some not so good, but definitely different. On the not so good, we have lost a generation of folks that Katrina didn't do this, but that's what has happened in those 18 years.
Yeah.
And when I say those folks, I'm talking giants, Fats, Art Neville, Dr. John, Pete Fountain. All of those folks are no longer here. Alan Toussaint. This is an entire generation
Marcellus.
And Ellis,
Yeah,
of
Ellis, Marcellus, an entire generation of real giants of our business. The argument could be made that, yes, these people would have aged on and we would have lost them anyway, but that is a difference of what this community is today. That being said, the community continues to thrive. We continue to have a number of wonderful things happening, newer things that make this community better. One, the music industry program over at Loyola, something we did not have prior to Hurricane Katrina, which has really come along. That has sort of been the knock on our music industry, that we didn't have the infrastructure and we're not educating our musicians. Another wonderful program, which started the year before Katrina, but actually has really thrived, is the Ella Project, which offers free legal services for folks, pro bono legal services for folks in the music community. We've heard all the horror stories about these musicians living long lives, but in the end of their lives not having to be able to support themselves when they can't get publishing rights or any of that kind of stuff. So that's really, really good. One of the really very good institutions that came along that kind of no longer exists in its same form was the Tipitina's Foundation. You know, tragically, the guy who's head of that, Roland von Kernatowski, and his wife were running the foundation. But what they did do very well was supply thousands of local kids with instruments.
Instruments are coming. Yeah.
Instruments are coming. For, you know, a decade and a half there, did really, really well with that. And that was good. Eventually losing the club, but still, you know, the work they did was wonderful work. So there have been efforts to help our musicians all along. Had a conversation yesterday, knew I was coming here, with Rachel Van Voorhees, the beautiful harpist with the Louisiana Philharmonic. She said, LeBron, in Katrina and during Katrina, the one thing we had was people from other parts of the country being able to fly us out to LA to perform or do benefits in different parts of the country. She contends what was probably more damaging than Katrina to the music business has been the pandemic. And not only because it wasn't just a New Orleans unique situation, but it was a global situation where everyone hurt. And that while we had made great strides up until that point, it really knocked everyone back because it also affected everyone in the service industries and the support of the music business here locally. So Katrina was what it was, and we kind of got through that, but we're kind of getting back on the horse now with what the pandemic left us 2 years ago.
You know, I think it spoke well for the city. Within that first 6 months to the year after Katrina, when the city's trying to figure, what do we do now?
Yeah.
There was a lot of talk about the culture. People saying, what about, a lot of cities don't have a culture to worry about.
That's correct.
Okay, but we did.
That's
There's a lot of talk about it when we heard this term, culture bearers, that developed, okay? The phrase NOLA was used at post offices. It really became part of the language.
Yes.
Okay, after Katrina, as part of a shorthand term, I think, for the culture. So the fact that we had this concern shows that it really has something worth preserving.
It does. And that part of the culture in the music business is healthier than it's ever been. The Mardi Gras Indians, there are probably more Indian tribes here, you know, gangs or whatever they call themselves, than they've ever been. There are more brass bands than we've ever had. That was something that was actually bubbling up prior to with Dirty Dozen Brass Band and The Rebirth and Hot 8. Those bands would sort of revive that in the late 80s and really drag that culture on. But it's heartwarming to see that. The social aid and pleasure clubs and the second line calendar throughout the year full as well. So, I mean, in some ways, we're healthier than we've ever been.
But, you know, our good buddy Jan Ramsey over there at Offbeat has been sounding the alarm about live music. And,
and that is definitely troubled. And that gets back to the point of what the pandemic did and where we're still struggling to sort of figure it out there.
To get that back. All righty. Thanks a lot, LeBron. Okie doke. Don, over to you. Our airport, which actually it's going to be marked 4 years this fall.
It's going to mark
in
4
November
years
that it's been
this
open.
fall.
And what's new?
And
with it?
the flyover ramps from the interstate
right.
are still not connected. But I'm told today they are scheduled to open prior to Thanksgiving travel weekend. So they will be back. There will be a dedicated lane on the outside of each direction on I-10 that's an exit-only lane, and that exit-only will take you up the ramp and directly onto the airport access road, or off the access road and directly onto the interstate. In terms of numbers, the airport is humming along for real. Year to date, they're at 11% more than they had been prior to last year's numbers. And just to put that in perspective, year to date goes through the end of June. They don't have more advanced numbers than that. Through the end of June, 3,181,177 people got off domestic flights in New Orleans Airport. We are at 94% of the pre-COVID levels of passenger traffic. They expect that we will be at 100% of pre-COVID levels before the end of the year. In terms of international business, people coming in from an international destination, it's whether it's you returning from a trip abroad or someone coming here from abroad, that's not factored in, but it's 117% more than it was at this time last year.
Wow.
At this time last year, it was about almost 29,000 people getting off planes from an international destination. Now it's almost 63,000. So that's really, really coming up. In terms of international destinations, there is still the direct nonstop between here and Heathrow via British Airways. That's currently running 5 days a week 5 days a week. There's a direct flight between here and Heathrow, and they're trying to garner enough community support to make that a daily flight. There's also a nonstop to Montreal offered by Air Canada with service to Toronto. There are nonstops to Cancun and San Pedro Sula. They're hoping to increase the international destinations as well as domestic ones too. Breeze Airways is really coming on strong in this market. It's a new airline that started here about 2 years ago. It's the only airline that has an operations base in New Orleans, meaning there are flight attendants, pilots, and a maintenance crew that are headquartered here. That airline has added seasonal transit to Fort Myers, Florida, and nonstops to Orlando. I like them for their nonstops to Charleston. They are growing. I asked the question today, what happens if you want a new nonstop, if you would support it? Because I have family in Charleston. I would look for direct to Charleston. Not finding it, I would choose to drive, not fly, because it would take me almost as long to fly than drive. So I'm not in that computer database as someone who's traveling from New Orleans to Charleston. They did not have an answer to that question. So if anybody out there does, there's got to be a way. If you want more direct flights to a certain market,
well, I think that's what Breeze is trying to do.
hit up the airport or the airlines on social media. Honestly, that is the way to
Breeze
get
is trying
there.
to reach those second-tier cities that
Yes.
are usually reached. You know, so
And they don't know how many people might be driving from here to there. In terms of other new things at the airport, in May they opened a brand new military lounge for active duty military members and their family. And they have about 98 visitors per day in that lounge. All of the concessions have reopened since the pandemic. There was a slow, methodical way to get them all back open. And there's a new system online to reserve your parking. Instead of getting there on a busy weekend, could be this weekend, could be fall breaks, could be Thanksgiving when the ramps are back open, you can go ahead and reserve that spot online and know you have a spot at the airport, parking closest to the airport. They also have valet parking at the airport now.
Okay. All right. Very good update about what's happening in our airport. And we'll be looking for that flyover ramp to be open around Thanksgiving.
Around Thanksgiving,
Okay.
right before. So, you know.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Indeed.
Williams and the interstate is different just about every time you see it.
Okay. All righty. Thanks a lot, Don. Greg, over to you, because there was a big fire at the Marathon Refinery.
Yeah, this was a bit scary if you were going down Airline Highway, and even, you know, you could see it from the interstate as well. This was a leak in a tank that holds naphtha, which is one of the components of fuel. And it burned for 7 hours, forced the evacuations of folks within a 2-mile radius. There was a school within that circle that also moved its students out. And we did a little bit of follow-up reporting that indicates that this is not really a one-off for Marathon, that within the past few years, there have been better than a dozen accidents, leaks, and such. And I think the big question mark hanging over this is, like, what exactly is this putting out there into the air? LDEQ has not necessarily been forthcoming with, okay, here's what's out there, it's safe. To Marathon's credit, they've reported all of these promptly, but again, not so much with a whole lot of detail.
And as far as this last one, with that huge plume of black smoke that just kept pouring out, they called an evacuation. Why? What were they afraid of? And then ultimately, what has it done?
I think the ultimate reason for the evacuations was just the fire risk. Would there be another explosion? And I think at that time they weren't quite sure of, local officials at least, what's in that air. Naphtha, essentially, it's like burning like a very rich gasoline, oily gasoline, if you will. And clearly, if that's like in a high enough concentration, especially if you have health issues, breathing issues, it's going to be pretty difficult on you.
Mr. Opinion here. We got the notification from officials within 24 hours reporting the next morning that there are no impacts off-site. And I thought that was kind of bizarre to sort of put that out there so quickly.
24 hours in might be too soon.
Yeah, that is my point.
Yeah.
And when we say no impact, okay, so the houses in the neighborhood, no, they aren't on fire, but I gotta believe they're full of ash, smoke, or something that is an impact.
Highly likely. And I think another thing that officials in St. John what they're going to have to do is look at their notification system. A lot of it runs through the companies, and this is not just Marathon, that they're dependent on basically the company just to say, hey, there's a problem. I think they're going to take a closer look because, you know, obviously those of us in the media here
Yes.
are part of the mechanism that alerts the public to danger. And because it was sort of a bit of a slow rollout of going through the company to the parish then sort of notifying through its social media channels, which is great if you're like locked into Facebook or Twitter, whatever. But this is what we do. We help the people. So
Right.
Not only there's a problem, I'm sorry for cutting you off,
No, it's
Greg,
fine.
but just what I just mentioned, that not depending on the plant to say, hey, you guys are good.
Yeah.
You're fine. It's all good.
Is the
It's all-
bucket brigade still active?
They are.
Yeah.
They are. And they have been critical of similar
Yes.
incidents and really have measured for accountability. You can go back not too far to the Dow chemical plant in Plaquemine upriver, and there's another instance of a facility that's had a track record of issues and questionable slaps on the wrist from regulators.
They spoke up also a program called the Descendants Program, these two sisters out of St. John Parish.
Joy and Joe Banner.
They were also very vocal this week in speaking out against this as well, saying that, this is what we've been fighting for. Of course, Rise St. James and the neighboring parishes have been very vocal as well.
We have to move along, but how long are folks evacuated for?
The all clear was given later that day.
Okay. All righty, guys. Thanks a lot. Okay, E, over to you. Latest on our election.
Okay, well, we have our trusty poll, and it's not a lot of changes from last week, because this was the Ron Fauché poll paid for by a consortium of the media, and it showed Landry still in the lead, and I wouldn't think that much has changed during this week. However, things may change after this week. I'll tell you why in a second. But Jeff Landry still has the commanding lead, and Sean Wilson. That seems the way to go. You're starting to see more commercials now. Hunter Lundy has a commercial now where he's a very religious man, and he's kind of a fundamentalist, and he's kind of campaigning on religious values, and he's campaigning a lot in churches, and a lot of people like that. Stephen Wagasback was the head of Laborde, and he had his own commercials, but he's trying to present himself as the outsider, and in a sense he is, but his opponents are trying to point out, well, if you were the head of Laborde, which is really a lobby organization, how much of an outsider are you? And then he was also the administrator for Bobby Jindal during his first term. Now, he will do anything he can to distance himself from Jindal. He felt there in the first term, but not during the second term, because I was really disappointed in it. John Schroeder, who's the treasurer, is starting to show some commercials now, and his is basically, I could put up a good fight and do better. And so that's what we're seeing now. We're not, Sharon Hewitt had some commercials earlier, haven't seen any lately, but kind of using the angle, I'm a grandma. And
Nothing wrong with being a grandma.
You can trust grandmothers. It worked for Kathleen Blanco, Yeah. So what I think is about to happen, though, is Labor Day. Because traditionally after Labor Day is when the campaigns really
the gloves
fire
come
up.
off, yeah.
So we're seeing the preliminary stuff right now. But I think within the next few weeks until October 14th, we're going to see a lot of these things going back and forth.
And you're entering debate season, the televised debate season. And with Jeff Landry so far agreeing to only participating in the Next Star television family debate, anyone that's waiting to see, okay, how does he do in the debate? They're really going to have like that one opportunity, it looks like at this point anyway.
Right. Didn't he say he's not going to be participating in one next week?
Yeah, he's bypassed one that's WWL, Times-Picayune, Urban League, and his campaign and the Republican Party of Louisiana have said that it's because of that Urban League involvement that they want no other, and the state party has asked all Republican candidates to bypass that debate. The other Republican candidates have said basically, no thanks, we're going to do it.
Okay, well, debates. And there'll be
Well,
one on
not the game of
LPD
being
on
in the
September
debate.
28th that we will air. Also will be aired on WYES. So, okay, let's talk about Steve Scalise.
Yeah, multiple myeloma is the diagnosis for the House Majority Leader, and I just dug into a lot of what experts on cancer have said, and that the 5-year survivability of this cancer when caught is in the range of 60%. Now that's based on data from 2012 to 2018, and one can only think we've gotten a little bit better at this. The average age of the person diagnosed with this is 69. Scalise is 57, and he survived just a horrid shooting incident, essentially taught himself to walk again, a real near-death experience. So it's kind of hard to count out someone like that. He has said that, he's going to jump into treatment, which at this stage typically is chemotherapy. He's not shared that specifically. There's also
Nor where he's having the treatment,
exactly. I think he intends to be in Washington as soon as he is, able to return. And as I've learned, I think, that depending on how you respond, and this is true really with a lot of cancer treatments, depending on how you respond, I think is how soon you can resume some sort of day-to-day activity. And he's clearly got, I think, folks on both sides of the aisle pulling for him. And again, and I think kind of what, I won't say it was surprising, but I think one of the things I think it's fair for people to bring up at this time is noting that he has access to probably the best insurance plan there is out there. So I think there are some people politicizing that, and I think it's fair. Others doing so in kind of a, I'd say, a less tasteful way. At the end of the day, he's a parent and a dad, and I think
correct, and he is entitled to it as he's a congressman.
Well, on the day he announced it, he sounded kind of upbeat. I mean, if it was treatable, now maybe you got to do that politically. I mean.
Yeah, I think it's getting out in front of a story, and not that I think his opponents would take advantage of it, but I think it was about to get out there, and he just sort of he described it as just was kind of feeling off. Which I think maybe, if anything, there's a silver lining in that someone may recognize, hey, you know what, I was kind of down here. Myeloma can present itself in a number of ways, from localized pain to, a bone break for a minor injury.
So sorry to see this happen, and wish him all the best with a very successful treatment. Okay, guys, real quick, other stories.
Okay, well, with Labor Day, Labor Day is really the beginning of the active season in New Orleans, where things really start popping. First you got football, and then you go into the holidays, then you go into Mardi Gras, then you go into all these festivals, and then you go to Jazz Fest. So between Labor Day and Jazz Fest, it's almost nonstop if you want to be in it. So,
and hopefully we get our first cold.
So rest a lot this week.
Real soon in September. All right, over to you, Greg.
Yeah, we're looking into how some pandemic relief money for restaurants is being spent and maybe not allocated as much as it could have.
Okay, Dawn?
One of those big events is the first annual Sugar Bowl Country Kickoff, which will have Garth Brooks at the Superdome, and it's expected to draw a huge crowd.
All righty, and LeBron.
Add to that, Decadence Weekend and the first LSU and Tulane games this weekend, so it's a huge weekend.
Big weekend, and it's hurricane-free, which is really good, too.
We'll take
all right,
it
guys,
this
thank
year.
you so much for being here, and thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a continued passion for public television, we are proud to underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES Television.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.